Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel and a very warm welcome if you're new. I hope you're all having a lovely holiday season so far. I don't have a Christmas doll for you this month, but today's video is extra exciting because it's part of a collab with some of my fellow doll artists. A little while ago, the wonderful Valkitty's World asked me if I wanted to join a Disney Princess meets D&D collab, and I love Disney animations, so of course I said yes. The artists taking part in today's collab are our host, Valkitty's World, his name is Akin, Diamonds of Craft, Doll Afterlife, Wichi Pink, and Stefoodle. Be sure to go check out their videos after this one if you haven't yet. I chose Cinderella for my contribution to the collab. It's one of my favorite Disney princess movies because of the beautiful animation and music, and I just love all her little animal friends. For my doll, there were certain aspects of Cinderella I really wanted to incorporate into my design. I really like the hairstyle she has for most of the film, so I decided to use that instead of the updo she has at the ball. But I didn't want to incorporate elements of her ball gown though. So I opted for something with more blue, since over the years Disney has started phasing out the sparkly white and silver dress and started portraying her in blue instead. Nowadays I feel like she's more recognizable that way. Since her whole thing is that she has to be home by midnight, I wanted to hint at this time aspect in her design, and of course Cinderella really isn't Cinderella without her gloss slippers. The scene where she sings while cleaning and causes all these bubbles is another big favorite of mine, so I had to have at least one bubble somewhere. And because I love the fairy godmother's magic and her little mice friends so much, I decided to use that in my design as well. So here's what I came up with. I chose to make a Jerbeen Sorceress for my D&D character. She's a sorceress because of the magic in the movie, and because it gives me an excuse to make her a cool magic staff, and a Jerbeen because they're a species that very much resembles mice or gerbils. But they also have a lot of kindness, empathy, and consideration for others, all of which are traits Cinderella herself also shares. It felt like an easy choice for her. I tried to incorporate as many elements of her original design as I could, but I also wanted to go for something that captures her essence, if that makes sense. You can see I swapped out her gown for some poofy pumpkin pants, which I felt was more practical than a dress if she had to fight or something. Her outfit is also inspired by Oji fashion, often referred to as Lolita boy style, because it already has a lot of elements that harken back to her dress, like the poofy sleeves and the draped fabric on her hips. It also very much feels to me like something that a sorceress would wear, because it has that magical academia vibe to it, you know. To complete my character, I gave her a magic quarterstaff as well. With all that said, let's get into the video. To make our Jerbeen Cinderella, I'm going to use Mouscedes King from Monster High G1. She has the little sister body, which works well for a Jerbeen character because they're supposed to be small, and she already has a mousy nose, teeth, and ears. But first we need to clean her up. So I dunk her head in some freshly boiled water for a few minutes to soften the vinyl. If you do this, and like me, you find that the head is still too hard, just put her back for a few more minutes. I've noticed the metallic vinyl heads tend to be harder than the others for some reason. Once she's soft enough, I carefully wiggle the vinyl around to try and get it over this first bump of the neck peg. Use a blunt tool to help you if it's difficult. Once it's over this bump, I gently squeeze and pull at the vinyl to slip it over these side pegs. It should pop off without the neck or the peg getting damaged. With that done, we can use that same cuticle pusher to scrape around inside her head. This pulls all the leftover hair out of the plugs and into the head, which we can then remove with a pair of tweezers. This part is always pretty gross because on these older dolls there's a lot of sticky, gunky glue in there. There we go, that's much better. Now we can wipe her face with 100% acetone. I also wiped the pink from her scalp, but this wasn't super necessary since we're going to paint her anyway. To remove any leftover acetone, I give her a wipe with a baby wipe. If you're ever wondering whether this doesn't just leave a residue as well, the wipes I use are made with mostly water. Her factory face-up was looking a bit wall-eyed, but she actually has a very pretty face sculpt underneath. The final part of prepping her is cutting this peg smaller. I cut the side peg shorter and trim the whole peg down so it looks like this. It makes it a lot easier to get the head back on after painting. However, before we paint her, I want to make her clothes first. I made her some patterns off camera using the plastic wrap and tape method and a lot of trial and error, and cut them out of these fabrics. I'm very excited about these shiny ones especially. Let's start with her waistcoat. I first sew the two halves together at the back seam, right sides facing. Then I sew around the shoulder seams and front seams to hem them. I also sew up the side seams. Next, we can hem the bottom as well. And there we go. I think it came out quite dapper. The shirt pattern works in a very similar way. First, we sew up the back seam. Oh no. Oh. And then we realize it was the wrong side, so we seam rip that and actually sew up the back seam. I think. Okay. This is the right way around now. I have triple check to make sure. After that, I add the darts. I usually place the pattern piece over it again and mark with small dots and a pin where the darts need to go, to make it easier for myself. Next, I sew the two pieces for her collar together and fold it wrong sides facing. Before attaching it to the collar of the shirt, I gather it. That way it makes a nice ruffle. Then we can sew it to the collar, also right sides facing, so that the seams are hidden when we flip it up like this. To represent the choker Cinderella wears to the bowl, I sew a black ribbon along the seam line of the collar. Next, I hem the front seams and it's ready for the puffy sleeves. With a Juliet sleeve like this, it needs to be gathered on top and on bottom, so I run a gathering stitch through it and gather it until it's the right length to sew to the bodice. I do this on both sides. After that, I hem this triangular part of the sleeve so it makes a nice point, and then we can gather the underside of the puff sleeve and sew it to this one. With that, I can sew up the side seams and insides of the sleeves to close everything up nicely, and hem the bottom. Off camera, I added beads for buttons and loops with silver thread as closures. I also did the same thing to the waistcoat. Next, we can make her little bloomers. I cut pieces of lace ribbon into rectangles and gather them with a stitch like this. It gathers up the fabric in a specific way to make a little poof. I do this to a shorter rectangle and a longer one since I want to layer them over one another like this. Then we can sew them and the waistband piece to the top of the bloomers right sides facing, like so. I do this twice for both legs of the pumpkin pants. Next, I sew up the crotch and back seams, but leave a little bit of the back seam open so we can add a closure later. I gather the bottoms of the pant legs, and sew them to the thinner band that's meant to go around her thighs. After that, we can sew up the inner seam and voila! Off camera, I add a snap closure in the back. To finish them, I found this cute little clock I want to add. I sew the one end of a small chain to the waistband with silver thread, add the clock, and sew the other end to it as well. When I tried everything on the doll, I realized the loops I made were too big, so they weren't staying on the buttons. I also didn't like how the shirt buttons were making the waistcoat bulge, so instead I just added buttons to the part of the shirt that peeks out under the waistcoat, and made all the loops smaller. That's much better. For her socks, I sewed some lace to a rectangle of ribbed knit fabric, then drape it around her legs wrong sides facing in. I sew up the sides as close to the leg as I can. Once I cut off the excess, we have this. After turning them right side out, they look like this. To make her a staff, I first twist a long piece of wire together to make it a bit thicker. I I found these gloss earrings that look just like bubbles, so I wrapped the ends of the wire around one of them to keep it in place. I also add a thinner wire to the stuff, which I will eventually use to represent her magic. Then I don some gloves and lay down a sheet of plastic and get out my epoxy sculpt. After feeling how easy it was to work with when I made Keely, I was eager to use it again. I take equal amounts of each. And mix them together. This causes a chemical reaction which makes it harden over time, which is also why you should wear gloves while mixing it. With that, we can start covering the wire frame with worms of epoxy. I smooth it out with some water while it's still soft to get rid of fingerprints and things like that. Then I use a silicone sculpting tool and some water to add a kind of wood grain texture to it. This is pretty fun to do because it doesn't need to be perfect. As long as there's some texture, like lines going down the length of the stuff, it's gonna look like wood. While doing this, I try my best not to get any epoxy on the thinner silver wire. Once that cures overnight, I can go back in with some worms of epoxy to add even more detail. It was looking a bit flat. I also add little roots, or maybe these would be little branches, around the bubble. Careful not to get too much epoxy on the surface, because I want it to stay shiny. Finally, I add a blob to the other end of the stuff and give it some lines with my silicone tool to help it resemble a pumpkin, as an homage to her pumpkin carriage. To make sure it's flat at the bottom, I also press it into the plastic gently. Around the base of the stuff, above that pumpkin, I add some snakes of epoxy to look like twine or rope. Kind of like the rope at the end of Cinderella's broom to keep the bristles in place. Once everything cures, it looks like this. I mix some dark brown acrylic paint as a base color for her stuff and paint the whole thing with it, excluding the thinner wire and bubble. Once that's dry, I can dry brush it with a lighter brown to bring out details. With brown, you have to be careful when you add white because it can come out kind of pinkish, so I mix a warmer tone of light brown and go over the dry brushing again. For just the pumpkin, I also add some orange. I still want it to look like wood, but I wanted this small detail to help make it clear that it's a pumpkin, you know? The rope gets a base coat of black, and I dry brush a bluish grey over it for some dimension. Now, about this wire. I was very inspired by the Cinderella Barbie by Lisa Temming, especially the magic swirls and how they were made of beads. So I wanted to try something similar. I add a variety of silver beads to the wire, including some cascading down, until I get this. Then I can just carefully bend the wire to swirl it up and around the bubble. For her shoes, I commissioned an artist on Fiverr to make her gloss slippers, but asked them to give her a wedge heel. I feel like those are more practical. I had them printed in clear blue resin, and they came out great. After printing, there are some bumps and things left over from the supports, so I gently buffed those out with a sanding block. To help them look more see-through and shiny like gloss, and to remove the white cast that was left over after sanding, I covered them in a few layers of acrylic gloss varnish. I could have used resin for this, but I worried it would be too thick and we'd lose the detail of that little heart in the front. There you go, nice and shiny. There are some scrapes left over on the insides, but we won't see those when she wears them with socks. Since I bought her secondhand, I don't have Mouscedes' original tail, but I also want her tail to sit lower anyway, so I mark where I want it to go, then drill a new hole with my rotary tool. I wrap some more wires around one another, making sure the end is a bit thicker. I forgot to film it, but I also covered the tail in some Apoxie sculpt, just like I did for her staff. I want to repaint her, like I said, so I mixed some Vallejo Game Air paints in the colors white and elf skin, along with some airbrush thinner to get a nice creamy light beige color. I think in Mice and Rats this color is called Champagne, but it's basically the color of this popsicle stick I'm mixing it with. I take her and her tail out to spray them with my airbrush, and she looks like this. I think this color looks very nice on her. Onto her face up. First, I take her outside to get a layer of Citadel sealant. I start by adding some yellow and light brown chalk pastels for shading around her forehead, eyes, and cheeks, just to add some dimension to her face. I also add some to her chin and jawline, and add some pink to her cheeks. I also added some pink around her eyes. Another thing that needs pink is the inside of her ears. You can't have a mouse girl and not add that. While I'm at it, I add pink pastels to her little nose as well, fading it upwards. Basically in all the areas that a real mouse would have some pink showing. To make her look even more friendly, I add shadow to the corners of her mouth so they look like they're turning upwards. With a tool that I think is either called a sniper brush or an airbrush cleaner, I add pink pastels to her lips and her eyelids. I also make tiny dots to remind me of her eyebrow placement. With that, she's ready for another layer of sealant. Mouscedes has a pretty distinct eye shape already, so I just follow them with pink watercolor pencil. I do want them to be kind of rounded though, to match Cinderella's eyes, so I draw her waterline on the inside of that shape and don't extend the tear ducts too far towards her nose either. I also darken that little eye fold she has above her eyes. I want her to have big bright irises too, so I draw the placement for those as well. So that she's looking forward, I make sure to leave more of her sclera visible on the outer corners of her eyes than the inner corners. I also mark off where her pupils need to go. Then, with that same pink, I darken the tip of her nose a bit. Next, I start coloring her lips with pink as well. I was trying to give her more of a rosebud shape than Mouscedes has, but I'm not sure I succeeded. With a white pencil, I add highlights to her nose and Cupid's bow, and start filling in her sclera. Cinderella needs blue eyes, so I color her irises first with a light blue, and work my way up to a darker shade below her eyelashes. I also outline the irises with that same darker blue. With a color that's close to the honey blonde of her hair, I draw her eyebrows. I just want them to be rounded and lifted a bit so she has a friendly, open expression. I lost some footage here, but I also drew her upper eyelashes in black. Next, I fill in her pupils. They're a bit smaller than I would normally draw them, but I want her to have that bright-eyed look, as opposed to a half-closed lid or something. So I'm erring on the side of caution for now. With white, I add some more highlights around her eyebrows. This is about as far as my pencils could take me, so I take her outside for another coat of sealant. With my acrylic paint, I add darker pink to her lips, just like she has in the movie. I also give her some light pink eyeshadow. This wasn't in the movie, but I really like how it contrasts with the blue of her eyes and adds softness to her skin. I added some highlights to her lips here, but I didn't like them, so I paint over them again later. Next, I add more pink to the tip of her little mousy nose. With a cream color lighter than her skin, I add highlights to her nose, around her eyebrows, her inner eye corners, and her cupid's bow. I darken all the lines I drew in pencil around her waterline and tear ducts, then use a lighter color to fill them in as well. I add white to her little mousy teeth, and go over her sclera with white as well to brighten up her eyes. Next, her irises get a few different shades of blue, starting with light blue at the bottom and working my way up to a darker blue closer to the eyelashes. I also mix a honey blonde color to paint individual eyebrow hairs for her. And I go back in with a lighter color towards the inner corners of her eyebrows as well. Then, I hold my breath and very carefully go over her eyelashes with a very thin brush. I do the same with her lower lashes. Before painting the individual lashes, I mark off where I want them to go using a pencil. Then go over them carefully with paint. Now we can finally use a dotting tool to give her proper pupils again. Once those are dry, I finish her eyes by adding little white dots for eye shines. Now she needs some hair. I have some acrylic yarn in this color. In the movie, Cinderella doesn't have a light blonde hair, it's more a honey color or maybe a strawberry blonde, and when this yarn is brushed out it looks exactly like that. I cut some strands to the length I want, then tie them to my trusty mini coat hanger like this. When it's full, I start unraveling the yarn to separate the individual strands in them. This makes brushing it out a lot easier and helps the hair stay longer because there's less breakage. It's pretty frizzy once it's brushed out, so I use my mini straightener to smooth it out. See what I mean about the honey blonde color? To make wefts, I lay down a sheet of plastic and cut the hair from the hanger. Then I line it up so it's in a straight line and lay my ruler down on top of it. Next, I pour some white school glue over the edge that's peeking out and rub it in with my finger while pressing down on the ruler. Doing it like this gives you a nice clean edge once you pull the ruler off. After it dries, I cut it into neat little wefts like this. With her face all done, we can glue the wefts we made. I use an all-purpose tacky glue and start gluing wefts to the back of her head, working my way up from the hairline. Around her ears, I glue the wefts facing upwards. This way we can fold them back and press them with a heated butter knife to make a nice part. Once I get to the friar tuck appearance, I draw in pencil where her fringe needs to start. Then, I start gluing wefts from her front hairline and work my way back with all the wefts facing forward. At the top of her head, I glue one more weft facing back, but put it right up against the fringe wefts. The last one gets glued on top of them both, facing forward. Then I can flip it back and press it down with a heated butter knife as well, so that it makes a nice part like this. I part the section of hair that will become her fringe, twist it like this, and cut straight across. I cut it a bit longer than I wanted because we're still going to style it. It wasn't the best first cut, but also not the worst. Next, I separate pieces on the sides of her head, which I cut at about chin length. This is called a hime haircut, if I'm not mistaken. Now I can tie up her hair with a bow, style it, add some details like earrings, and our Cinderella Sorceress is done. So, what do you think? I'm really happy with how she came out. Before working on this custom, Mouscedes was never one of my favorite Monster High dolls. I always thought she was cute, but I didn't realize how much I would end up liking her. She was such a joy to work on. There's always room for improvements though. Her collar came out a bit bigger than I expected, and the magic swirl could have been bigger. If I made the wear just a smidge longer, the swirls could have been wider and more impressive. all in all, I'm very happy with her. What did you think of her? If you had to pick a Disney princess to turn into a D&D character, who would you pick? And what would you turn her into? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, be sure to check out my collaboration buddies and the amazing dolls that they made. They're all super talented, so it's well worth a watch. A big thank you to Valkitty's World for hosting such a fun collab and inviting me to it. I had such a good time working on this doll and talking to everyone in the group chat about what we were making. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every view, and those of you who watch until the very end especially warm my heart. Those little bloopers and funny bits I add after the end screen are for you specifically. If you like this video and you think I deserve it, you can leave me a big old-fashioned thumbs up below. Likes, comments, and shares really help me out in the algorithm. And if you want to see more videos like this one, why not hit subscribe? You can also follow my socials, where I post behind-the-scenes stuff and sneak peeks of upcoming projects. I have Instagram, Kara, Blue Sky, and TikTok, and I try to post on all of them pretty regularly. I have a lot of very exciting doll things planned for the new year too. I'll be continuing a series that I already started a while back, but I'm also going to start a brand new series which I have been super excited to start working on. So if you don't want to miss that when it comes out, boop that subscribe button, stick around, and as always, stay golden. I'll see you next time. Bye! Okay, bye. Don't mind me, I'm just de-gluing my finger. Did you guys do this as a kid? You put like a bit of glue on your skin and let it dry and then peeled it off and pretended that you were peeling your own skin? Or was I just weird?